oh, well, if there's a bomb, I'll just jump out of the way or something. I didn't feel brave at the time, but feels it looking back. You know, I got enough partying in and I got enough work in. You'll need to make it a competitive advantage that your people use it better than everyone else's people.
Wow.
It's a lot to unpack there, sorry.
You've kind of blown up my brain a little bit.
Today on the File Notes podcast, we are joined by Sam Nickless, the CEO of Gilbert and Tobin, one of Australia's largest and most innovative law firms. 9 years ago, after an awesome career outside of law, Sam returned to the legal industry to help lead the firm and cultivate an innovative culture that stands out in the profession today. Our conversation covers a lot of topics, but dives deep into something I'm super passionate about, how AI and legal tech will shape the future of the legal field, and how firms should be developing today to maintain an edge.
Sam, I'm so excited for this. I've heard great things from your colleagues. It's good to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Luke. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I'm from Christchurch. You're from Adelaide. They're sister cities, actually a really similar design. And I understand you spent some time growing up in both cities. What was it like for you?
Oh, I did. I was born in Adelaide and I spent my first few years of life there, and then I did have a little stint in New Zealand, in Christchurch, between the ages of about 8 and 10, so I guess pretty formative years in my education. I had a good time growing up in both Adelaide and Christchurch. I had a pretty good family life, and they were great cities to be a kid in. Lots of easy to get around, play sport, and good quality education that I got. So yeah, they were really, really nice places to be. Obviously, I left Adelaide after I finished uni, and I haven't lived there since, but I've got close connections with family and I go there a lot. Unfortunately, I've only been back to Christchurch once. I'd love to go back again soon.
Yeah, it's changed a lot in recent years since the earthquakes, so it's definitely an interesting city to check out. Did you move around anywhere else growing up?
Yeah, so I did an exchange. I was an exchange student just after high school. I was only about 16 or so when I finished my year 12, and I did a year as an exchange student in Sri Lanka as an AFS student. So that was very different again. I lived with a Sri Lankan family, went to school there, and I had a really interesting year. At the time, there was still quite a bit of civil war going on in Sri Lanka. I'm not quite sure how I managed to get myself sent there or how my parents let me. I think they regretted it every day. They were very worried about me, but it was a great experience. I got to learn a little bit of the local language. I can still say a few words in Sinhala, and came back sort of quite different from that experience, and then came back to Adelaide to do my uni.
Yeah. What stood out to you from, like, obviously Sri Lanka is like very different culturally to New Zealand and Australia, and US has its differences to, I guess, our South Pacific cultures, but what was that like?
Yeah, look, I think the thing that really stood out for me in Sri Lanka was just, I guess, very, very strong kind of family relationships and a lot of respect for elders, that sort of slightly different style, and I guess, a fairly strong religious bent that ran through the place, which is a little different from my own kind of way of thinking, but it was interesting to experience it and see that kind of devotion to religion through other people's eyes.
Yeah, moving to Sri Lanka for a period at a very young age, coming from Australia, would take a lot of almost, I guess, bravery or confidence.
Yeah, I suppose what I'd call it would be the bravery and confidence of a 17-year-old who probably thinks, oh, well, if there's a bomb, I'll just jump out of the way or something. You're so young, you sort of haven't fully developed the risk assessment that you get as you're a bit older. So you sort of, yeah, it sort of doesn't didn't feel brave at the time, but feels it looking back. And remembering in those days, this is pre-internet, pre-email, pre-easy phoning, like... I wrote a letter home once a week, got one back roughly once a week, and maybe had a short phone call with mum and dad every month or so because it was so expensive. So you really are away. I think now, if you did something like that now, you'd never really be away because you'd be doing FaceTime calls and in constant contact with everyone back home. But you really do cut the ties in that era, and you're on the road.
Of course, yeah, that's a really interesting nuance that I suppose I hadn't thought about just when you were telling your story, because I've grown up with the internet, and
Yeah, I
so
know. Yeah, the digital natives listening will be like, they will not understand quite what it means.
how did you think like the experience, almost, uh, for lack of a better phrase, like abandoning your family as a young kid and traveling overseas? How do you think that experience like affected who you are today? Because obviously that sounds like something that would be pretty formative.
Yeah, it is. I think, look, it makes you very independent, makes you think about kind of looking after yourself. You just sort of learn the basics of life admin, I guess, if you call it that, and embrace that.
Yeah. When you were around that age, did you have like a job that you really wanted to do? You mentioned, kids often want to be astronauts. I did. And was everyone, has these ideas of like, oh, I'm going to be a politician or an architect or something like that. What was that for you?
Oh, I think towards that back end of, I guess you're thinking around that time of leaving high school and doing that time in Sri Lanka, I'd started to form on lawyer. I think I'd really enjoyed arguing, really being annoying to my teachers with arguing, but language and the use of language and sort of justice, and I also was pretty interested in business as well. So it was kind of a business sort of side of law that I'd had in my mind. But I think I'd formed that view at that point that that's what I wanted to do. The way things worked at Adelaide University at the time is you couldn't apply into law straight from school. You had to apply into another course, and then after the first year, convert to law based on your grades in your first year at uni. So that was my ambition, was to get into law, but my first degree and my entry into university was economics. So I think by that point, that's what I was thinking. Seeing lawyers on TV and things like that. We didn't have lawyers in our family, so I didn't have that kind of path. But I think that's what I'd really landed on at that point.
Yeah. Thinking back to that time, you were at uni, like, who were you really? Were you, partying? It sounds like you were a good student. Maybe were you spending too much time in the library to go out drinking? What was that
Yeah,
like?
no, I was a pretty balanced student actually. I guess in a way, my dad said to me a piece of advice when I started uni, and I thought it was good advice. And he said, kind of treat it like a job. Like others from school will have a job at this point. Just treat it like a job. Pretty much during business hours, do uni, and then the rest of your time's to yourself. And that's kind of how I treated it. Just kind of got in there in the sort of 9 to 4, 9 to 5 kind of time frame. Did my lectures, did my tutes, did some time in the library preparing, and from that point onwards, I could really, like someone that's working, when you knock off, you had your time to yourself. And for me, that was playing football, being on the university football team, around the university football club, going out. I had a girlfriend at the time, so we spent a lot of time together. So I think I had a pretty good balanced times during my student life, and I got enough partying in, and I got enough work in.
That sounds good. So today, young students run into a lot of challenges around, new technology, distraction. They have all of these things that they have to overcome. What were the challenges that you were running into when you were studying?
Maybe when I compare it with that, there was, in some ways, less information or less technology. The way you did legal research or research in any field was very analog. You were looking through reference books, looking for references to cases. You're going to the physical hard copies in libraries. That might be checked out to someone else. Then you sort of track back through the references to find another book, and there's a few indices that you can look up. But it wasn't really until late in my time at uni when the digital age really started, and there were tools like, I think the university had a terminal for LexisNexis to look up stuff. But other than that, until that point, it was a very analog world. So I guess, compared to the technology overload that the students have these days, where I think the skill is about sifting through so much to get what's relevant. We were really on a bit of a treasure hunt of analog searching to find the things that we needed to know, or we relied on, I guess to some extent we relied on the professors and others sort of pointing out, or textbooks pointing us in the right direction. But we had to do a lot of that for ourselves, and I think it teaches you quite a bit about the base of where you're getting your information from, because you're actually quite viscerally in it yourself.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really interesting change that's been really, in my view, significant for just the world, really. When I was growing up, if I had a question, like I could have it answered immediately. So I was talking about this with some practice managers recently, that, we're thinking about managing the next generation of lawyers. And there's often this perception that young lawyers and young people in general have this, expectation for like an immediate answer. And when they have questions about their career, professional development, their role, they want their managers to, come and answer those questions really quickly. And some people have, maybe put that down a little bit to just a sense of entitlement. But I think it's potentially more. My view is that it's probably more related to just like, if you're growing up, whenever you have a question, you can search and Google the answer, and it comes to you like instantly.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really interesting point you're making, that it's not about entitlement, but just about kind of the environment of having so much instantaneous information. I guess what you, again, and I guess most of the listeners might be from a younger age where they've had that experience. I mean, but before you kind of had the internet in your pocket at all times, we would have long arguments about things, which the solution lay somewhere in the world. And whether that was discussions around points of law in an academic setting, or you can imagine with a group of mates arguing over some sort of sporting statistic. These days, someone whips it out of their pocket and there's the answer, and the debate's over. We used to have sort of long discussions on these things. And I guess some of those discussions, whilst you sort of think back sort of annoying at some level, are also really helpful, because you're sort of passing data, you're thinking through arguments, you're trying to put your case, you're kind of doing a lot of recall. So it's just neither one's better or worse, they're just different, and they're just how things have evolved. And now that everybody has the facts at their hands, being the best recall of facts is no longer distinctive.
Yeah.
It's the ability to put the facts together, to create patterns, to make an argument, and to have empathy with the other person's argument so that you can deal with it. Those are the skills that then come to the fore a lot more.
Yeah, I'd say I think those skills are definitely still being practiced in long arguments, regardless of the facts. So yeah, I think that makes that's really important. So you started studying at Adelaide. 5 years later, you were a Rhodes Scholar studying law at Oxford University. Like, how did you end up there? What was that journey like?
Yeah, so I got encouraged along the way to sort of think of ambitions beyond where I was, and do different things. And I'd done well at uni. My dad in particular had been very encouraging of me and pushed me quite hard to have a look at doing the Rhodes Scholarship and studying overseas. I had a job lined up in Adelaide, and I was sort of going down that track of being a lawyer there and starting my legal career straight away. But some of the professors at uni and my father, as I mentioned, sort of said I should take a look at that and put myself forward. So I was lucky enough to win that through the process, and that set me up for going to Oxford for a couple of years, which was an incredible experience, and something that I am so glad that I did, and has given me so many opportunities, but also I learned so much from. It was a very different environment from doing uni in Australia. You spend a lot of time with everyone in your own course. So that's your economics or your law group, you're with them all the time, and you don't live on campus. But you sort of go there and you're immersed in the campus, and it's so diverse, the people that you're with, particularly at the graduate level. There's people from all around the world. There's people doing very different courses. I had, my housemates in accommodation I was in was an American guy from Stanford doing international relations, and then a Romanian woman. We had all sorts of different people, and it was sort of diversity of background and nationality is one thing, but diversity of what they were studying was the thing that was really interesting to me. So you're just having conversations about someone doing something that you hardly understand, but you're pretty interested in, like some sort of physics and the like. So that was a great experience. And on the legal side, it was very daunting at first. The sort of quality of what was expected of us, how articulate the students, particularly the ones from the UK and the US, were, and how well they'd read the cases, how deeply they were in the detail, really threw me back. I thought, oh dear, I'm in the big league here, and I'm not sure how I'm going to go. So it was very confronting at first, but it was a great experience.
Yeah, interesting. I also studied economics like you, and one time we had this for a semester we had this professor swap with Cambridge or Oxford, and I studied in Christchurch at University of Canterbury, and the style of teaching there is very different to, I suppose, these UK and probably a lot of American universities. This lecturer came over and it was very like Socratic style.
Mm.
So
Yes.
you'd have this reading that you had to do prior to the lecture, and when you showed up, it was about debating and discussing the readings. My experience until then was really you do the learning in the lecture for the most part, and maybe you practice it outside of the lecture, and so that was really different learning environment for me. What was that quite similar, or had you been learning through this kind of Socratic style at Adelaide as well?
Oh, no, I think much the same as yours. I think the Australian New Zealand system's quite similar. I think that was a big shock. You had to have done your work pre the lecture or seminar. You'd get called on and expected to have something to say and something to contribute to the discussion. And then there's another method that I have at Oxford as well, which the tutorial method, which is basically preparing an essay and then turning up to the professor's lodgings, effectively. Normally was one or two students, and having to read your essay out loud to the professor and the other student, and then have them critique it and discuss it. That was pretty daunting, I've got to say. I remember turning up to one of them, having played a game of rugby beforehand for the college, and I think I must have got concussed or hit pretty hard at some point in the rugby game. I turned up to this thing and I was in enormous trouble. Really, I don't think I could follow anything, and I got a stern talking to about the fact that I'm not supposed to be playing sport and I'm supposed to be focusing on the law of evidence. So that was a pretty interesting situation to be in.
Hey, have you heard about G&T? Not the drink. Gilbert and Tobin is a leading independent Australian corporate law firm, advising clients on their most significant corporate transactions, regulatory matters, and disputes. If you're thinking about the next steps in your career, go to gtlaw.com.au/careers. That's gtlaw.com.au/careers to find out more.
Interesting. So during your studies, you're talking about you're on this track to become a lawyer. I understand you worked as like a paralegal during your studies. You were set to become a lawyer, but you never practiced. What drew you away from practicing?
Oh, look, I was, as I mentioned earlier, I did a dual degree with economics and law, and I was very interested in the business side of law, and the whole area of law and economics quite fascinated me, and so I did sort of have that business slant to it. And during my time in Oxford, I heard about McKinsey as a consulting firm. I'd never heard of them in Adelaide. There's a regular recruiting trip to there that the Australian office does, and I got to meet a few of the partners from McKinsey, and I went and did put myself forward in their process and got myself a job there. So instead of going to the law, I I joined McKinsey and Company as a management consultant, and a couple of my friends who were there at the same time did the same thing. What was kind of interesting about the time in Oxford was there was a lot of careers fairs from various employers, whether they were investment banks, consultants, etc., that were really quite interesting over there in that they didn't see university as a vocational training. So, banking firms weren't looking just to hire people out of finance or commerce. They would be happy to take somebody studying the classics. They were looking for kind of raw talent that they could work with. Whereas I think it's a bit more vocational here. The economics and accounting or commerce students will go to the accounting firms, the lawyers to the law firms, etc. So there was quite a different sort of world to it. So I took that job on. Interesting. I had a graduate job lined up in Sydney with Mallison's, so Mallison Stephen Jakes as it was called at the time, and I decided to take the job at McKinsey, and I had to call the partner from there and tell them that I'm sorry, I won't be taking up my grad offer. And the reaction of the partner that I called was incredibly supportive and generous in the sense of saying, well, I think that's a great idea. I think you'll learn a lot. I'd do the same if I was you. You should grab it, and if it doesn't work out, just give me a call and you can come here, which I thought was really good. And I guess I never made that call because I enjoyed my time at McKinsey. I ended up staying there for 10 years.
You touched on the interesting difference between maybe approaches, around hiring vocationally, where people have trained to do some work, and so someone studies law becomes a lawyer, versus this approach where you're more so looking for evidence of skills, maybe ability to learn and things like that. Where do you sit when you're leading, a large law firm today? How do you think about those differences when you're recruiting great people?
Yeah, so obviously I'm recruiting more into the business of law than lawyers themselves, sort of practicing fee earners. Most of the recruiting I'm doing is, except for the graduate and the clerk program, which I'll come to, is into that business of law area. And look, there's a bit of a mixture. There's definitely advantages in the legal industry from having a bit of an understanding of how lawyers work and how professional services work. So in various roles, that is nice to see, but it's not a must-have for us. I think in some cases, and we want to have a mix of it, having fresh thinking that comes in from outside the industry is also important. So, I think it's a balance, and I think it's sort of a portfolio across all of our roles. I like to have have enough of our people sort of have an understanding of legal from the day they walk in, and others back them to work it out because, it is a bit different from other businesses, but it's not so mysterious that you can't work it out if you've got kind of good basic capabilities in a functional area. That's kind of how we think about it at GNT.
Yeah, definitely. So I understand there are a lot of similarities working in consulting and big law. I've got a lot of friends who work, in both of those areas. It can be long hours. It can be a lot of hard work. What was your experience at McKinsey in those first few years?
Awesome. Well, I had a terrific experience overall. It's an incredible learning experience. You get to do very different things. The way it worked, certainly in those days for me in the Australian practice of McKinsey, you need to be quite a generalist because you work across a lot of different functions, whether you might do strategy projects or cost reduction projects, operational effectiveness projects. So you do projects across the range, and you might do multiple industries. And what I noticed in those early days is you go to training programs, there'd be colleagues from big market like New York or London, and after 6 months I'm a telecommunications revenue optimization consultant. And it's like, oh, well, that's nice for you, but that would be like, I'd do one project every 10 years if I was in Australia. So you get a very broad immersion in business and get to see it. Lots of different businesses learn to learn businesses. And that's an incredible experience. From the sort of working hard and lifestyle point of view, it is demanding, and in consulting, the thing that's the biggest challenge is the travel. And so in my first 2-3 years at McKinsey, I think I spent well over half my time in New Zealand, and I flew back and forth probably 80 times, and the first couple of years, I think, because I was going almost every week for a lot of that time. So, that's a lot of time away from your family. I was married. I didn't have kids at the time, but I spent a lot of time away from my wife, and I think what we all found through that was challenging, and I think everyone in the early stages of professional life finds challenging, is the uncertainty. You can't make a commitment to anyone because they say, "Oh, would you like to go out to dinner or play indoor soccer in 3 weeks' time on a Tuesday?" And you're like, "I don't know." I'm not no, but I don't know because I don't know what country I'll be in. And so uncertainty's the challenge, I think, that a lot of our young lawyers face as well. It's like you want to be able to commit to something with your partner or your family or your friends, and the work can be unpredictable. A very important client issue could come up at very late notice, and that causes that uncertainty. So, I think that's something about professional life that is challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I can really relate to traveling a lot for work. And it's like a massive privilege, and you get to see the world and have all these, like a diverse range of experiences. But when you're in a demanding job, it can be really hard to manage your workload while you're traveling. It's kind of just compounding, especially with the different time zones. So it's definitely something that takes a lot of practice and prioritization as well.
Yeah, and we've had a few reflections on sort of generation and time, but I think there's definitely an age factor in it. There's things that I used to do back when I was in my sort of 20s with travel that, back to back, fly in, go straight to work. That now at my age, I fly across to Perth. It's hard work. So I'd say get a hell of a lot of that in while you're young.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about key mentors in your life. You mentioned your dad a couple of times. Who were the mentors that really helped, I guess, craft you at a young age and support you? And like, what was the value for you in those mentoring relationships?
Oh, there's a few key ones along the way. I think back to my time at university in Adelaide. There was a professor at the university in the commerce department. He taught first year accounting. He was also heavily involved in the university football club, which is a very large. This plays Australian rules football. Large club with a lot of people in it. And he just recently died, actually, called Fred Block, and he had a great way of kind of bringing people along. He's an accounting student. I was playing for the club, and he sort of realised I was an accounting student, and very early on gave me responsibility as the club's treasurer, and that sort of. It was kind of outside the academic field, but kind of linked to it, and sort of the crossover between my interest in sport and my uni work. But it kind of gave me a real leadership opportunity inside an organisation with people older than me, and just sort of his encouragement was very important to me and gave me lots of opportunities. And I think things like winning the Rhodes scholarship, almost stem right back to that, because my academic results would have been a huge part of that, but actually things I'd done outside and involved with that group would have been really important to it. So kind of Fred's guidance and giving me opportunities along the way were really important to me. And then, I think from there, through various kind of roles I played, and I've had the benefit of quite a range of people looking out for me and sort of putting me in the right direction, and just kind of lifting my aspiration and my ambition. I think I wouldn't say there were too many kind of individuals guiding me every step along the way. Just little points along the way. I remember a partner at McKinsey seeing me at a firm, like it was a firm retreat, big meeting of everyone, and a partner from Melbourne who I didn't really know very well just sort of ran into me and said, I hear you're Sam. I hear you're doing well. And I remember that to that day, and I was like, oh, okay, that's great. So I wasn't really 100% sure where I stood, and he was like, that was encouraging. And I think that this sort of person knew about me and kind of had something to say was encouraging. So, it's not too many major sort of figures along the way. It's just lots of different people having a little part to play.
Yeah, it means a lot when especially when you're in that formative time when people take shots on you and like give you those like opportunities where maybe you don't necessarily think you're ready, or you do and you just haven't had the chance yet. And someone, I suppose, like takes that risk, and if there's kind of a big pressure that comes with it. Often, you don't want to let them down.
No, I agree. And I think now in the role that I have, and different roles along the way when I've been in a leadership role, I've benefited a lot from taking risks on some people, and I've really enjoyed kind of finding someone that's got a lot of talent, but maybe is a bit hidden, and seeing if we can take that a bit further and work with that. And so, I think that's been something I've tried to do, and I think I've done I think I've benefited pretty well from that, because I've had some great people do some amazing work with me that that's been a great benefit to me. So it really pays off if you take those shots, I think, as a leader.
Yeah, I love that. That's, for me personally, that's one of the more rewarding parts of my role. Karen said that one of your real strengths is the ability to identify that talent. When you're looking for great talent, what are those signals that you're looking for? And like practically, how do you assess for like the spark?
Yeah, look, I think you're looking for curiosity and a sort of delivery mindset. People who want to get things done have sort of got a bias to action and getting the first step happening. I think that's the thing you're looking for. What I guess I'll sort of see in it is somebody that's always kind of taking that extra, making something better than you would have thought of yourself, or just kind of adding value beyond exactly what they're asked to do, and it's sort of challenging you and going further. And when you see people with that sort of spark, and they've got that sort of, they're thinking about the business themselves, and they're acting like an owner and thinking, how do I make this better? When you see that, that's kind of what you lean into.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. I think, when you give someone a task and they come back to you having, just gone above and beyond, kicked it out of the park really, and thought, as you said, thought of things maybe that didn't come to mind for you, that's like such a green flag, and definitely gets me excited about someone's potential. So after 10 years at McKinsey, you spent time across banking, gaming, and property, a pretty eclectic mix of industries, but you didn't spend too long in each. Could you share a bit on that journey and what you learned from those experiences?
Oh, look, very different things. I guess it was a pivot away from being a consultant and an advisor to actually being a line manager. I was initially at NAB, I was in a strategy team. So I guess it was a bit like being an internal consultant, but then I was looking after a P&L. And so you really do learn the doing of it, and the thrill of kind of being accountable for end outcomes in a business. In consulting, you're accountable for delivering advice and making sure that advice is good, and you want to see your clients do it, but you're not really accountable for it. But the thrill I got when I was first in a line role at NAB was the daily text with the results from the previous day on. I was in credit cards with how many new credit cards we'd sold or what the spend was, and so you really were then in the game of what was happening and delivery of outcomes for your business. And so I think I took that was a real learning to understand that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So, and it's 2015, you spent 20 years out of the legal sector. What convinced you to come back and work for another law firm?
Oh, look, I guess in a couple of words, Danny Gilbert, coming back into the law after spending 20 years away from it, having dabbled in it when I was young, was sort of an interesting decision, but was actually a pretty easy one in the end. So I was working in property and I was enjoying my job there. GPT, great place to work, and I got a headhunter call, and the question was, would you be interested in being put forward as the COO of a law firm? And my initial reaction was I thought that sounded pretty boring, but they said, come and meet them. They're different. And I met with Danny, and he told me the Gilbert and Tobin story and what he was wanting to do and the way he thought about it, and how they were a firm that liked to do things differently. And I got pretty interested in that. And and whilst sort of going through the interview process, I did a bit of research on the law and legal tech and what was happening. And I realized actually it was a much more interesting business than I had remembered it and that I'd thought it was, and had a lot more kind of interesting strategic issues going on and things happening in the market that kind of caught my attention and made me think this could be a really interesting thing to do. So yeah, and then Danny was very persuasive once I think he'd got his head around that thought that he thought I might be good for the business. He was very persuasive to convince me to join, and you know, it's been wonderful being part of G&T, and it was a great decision that I made, and you know, I've loved it ever since. But it was it was interesting to sort of feel a little bit like returning. There was some familiarity to what I'd seen a bit of when I was younger, but things had definitely evolved a lot, and it was a very fun time to come back.
Yeah. So you joined G&T as the COO, the Chief Operating Officer. What does a COO of a law firm do, and how did that role change over time after you joined?
Yeah, so the COO role in a law firm for me was very broad. There are a few different versions of it, as I know from some of my colleagues who do roles with a similar title. But mine was very broad, so I had a very, very broad mandate. So Danny Gilbert, as the managing partner, was my direct boss and manager. And then I had responsibility for, and I still do, I have responsibility for what you would call the functions, the business services operations that are outside the fee-earning lawyers. So finance, HR, IT, knowledge management, office services, marketing, all of those functions would report into me. So it was very broad. It gave me a lot of variety of issues and the ability to kind of think across the breadth of those things. Obviously, in a law firm, you've got all the partners to deal with. Each of them have got different needs and different views about what they should be getting from those services. So you've got a broad set of stakeholders you've got to work with. So I did a lot of work early on what we called a futures committee that looked at how the legal industry was evolving. So I guess over time my role actually sort of expanded to take on some of that strategic aspect, and I think that's been really rewarding as well.
Yeah. So we talked about how you studied law but never practiced. A lot of the leaders of larger firms, you know, like Minter Ellison, were practicing lawyers before taking on their leadership roles. How do you think your career affected your leadership style and the strategy that you helped to set at G&T?
Yeah, look, I think the fact that I had done a career that had a variety of industries and had seen a lot of different things has been informative for me. So I, obviously with a strong leader in the firm as Danny, who's been in the legal industry for so many years and led a law firm to such great success, we had a strong understanding of practice that was there. And then mine was a little bit of, well, I'm coming from outside this. How does this, why does that make sense? Can we do this differently? So I think we had a I think we've got a good combination of challenge and understanding of what might be different about law and why law operates in a certain way, but also a willingness to challenge it. So that's kind of been the balance of the leadership team that we've had, and that we've tried to maintain through this next succession that we've done.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I think, I guess the tyranny of expertise and familiarity is often like this complacency, or lack of questioning when it comes to, this thing has always been done this way, or everyone else does it this way, or what have you. But what you touched on there, I suppose, is more along the lines of, the challenging, thinking from first principles, really asking why a certain thing is the way it is, and then also leaning on the expertise.
This episode of File Notes is proudly brought to you by VXT. VXT is the legal phone system. It's a cloud-based voice over IP phone system built specifically for law firms. VXT integrates with your practice management system to automatically record file notes and time entries against legal matters after every phone call. It even syncs your contacts so you know who's calling and what they're calling about before you answer the call. Find out more about VXT at vxt.co.nz/law.
Talk us through your big picture strategy versus day-to-day management. You're now the CEO.
Yeah.
In the role of COO and CEO, you need to use this like wide lens, but also look at the small details like staff compensation, costs, efficiency, technology, all of these things. How do you jump from one area to another and think about the long-term and short-term kind of thing?
Yeah, so you do need to make sure you're doing enough of each, and you need to be able to jump between them in a management sense, but also in kind of an investment sense about where we're putting our money and our resources and how those things link up. I always been sort of quite influenced since my McKinsey days on the little framework that was developed there related to growth companies, and it's called the Three Horizons, and it sort of says that the best growth businesses have a portfolio of initiatives and businesses across three horizons. The first being the core business and protecting and defending that core and extending it as long as you can. The second horizon being emerging areas that you're actively building new businesses. And the third being options you're seeding in the future. Things that you may or may not become new businesses, but you're sort of experimenting with and looking into. And you've got to have a good portfolio across those. And in fact, most of the people in most of the organizations will be working in Horizon 1 because that's still throwing off the earnings and the value creation of the business. But you can't have everyone there. You have to have some people working at these further horizons. So they're not like time. It's not like, we'll do Horizon 1 in the first 3 years and then in 3 to 5 we'll do 2. It's more like you have to have some investment now in all three horizons, but knowing that the value will come later. And so that kind of is a little bit of a framing. And so, and then in big picture strategy for the firm, we think about the role that we play. And in many cases, what we do is that we are a facilitator, and we follow where capital flows are going in the economy. That will dictate where finance is being raised, where M&A transactions will take place, where there's investments that need to be protected through litigation, technology contracts. So we look to that, and so long term or sort of medium term, it's thinking about how those capital flows might change, and how do we make sure that we're best positioned to be able to serve clients in those areas.
Yeah.
For what we've optimized over the last few years, and that we're very good at, and is around our Horizon 1, is sort of the way capital's been flowing. There's been a huge growth in private capital over the last decade or so. That private equity firms investing in lots of businesses. We have been a big part of and a beneficiary, but a service provider to that, where we work very closely with a lot of those firms. And there's also been a sort of a trend towards increasing government scrutiny and regulation of a lot of businesses, and we've been part of that as well. Going forward, we're thinking about a few of the emerging changes to that. That giving everything away, but like pretty obviously, if you think about it, over the next couple of years, the next sort of decade, I should go out a bit further than that. The big changes you can expect to see in the Australian economy and society generally would be the decarbonisation of our energy. If we're going to, as a planet, be serious about meeting the Paris Accords and limiting global warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees, if Australia's going to play our part in that, and if every industry is going to play our part in that, the amount of capital that's going to have to be invested to decarbonise the way in which our society runs and the way energy is created and used will be enormous. And that capital is going to require a lot of projects, a lot of financing, a lot of investment. So we're doing a lot of thinking about that, how we can make sure we're playing a really important role in decarbonisation. And the other one would be digitisation and the next wave of digital transformation. AI is the sort of one aspect of that, and that's really accelerated over the last year or so. But a lot of Australian businesses have done a first sort of phase of digital transformation, but I think there's still a long way to go, and so we'll see another wave of digitisation. So those two big themes are, for us, in the Horizon 2 world. We need to make sure that we've got the capability to serve what's going to happen there. At the same time, and this is probably goes a bit more to your legal operations side and the audience that we have, we're also thinking about how, in particular, the digitisation trend affects our practice and what the law firm would look like in 10 years' time, and how the actual, not just the sort of what we're working on, but the how we're working on it might change over that period. So, we want to position ourselves for those big trends in capital, as well as servicing what's happening now, but also make sure that we're adapting our law firm to those realities as well.
Yeah, wow, that the Three Horizons model, that's super interesting. I haven't heard of that approach before, but it's definitely one I'm going to take away and think about and probably use in my work.
Yeah, there's a couple of good articles on it you can find on the web that kind of lay it out probably a bit better than I did. But
It sounded pretty clear, I have to say. It was good. You talked a little bit about how providing legal services might change. Not necessarily what we're working on, but how we're working on it. Personally, I think that in the not too distant future, let's say 10 to 15 years, across a lot of professional services like law, I think we'll see a transition away from this skilled technical legal work, what is today potentially the largest part of the legal profession, toward a situation in a lot of areas where software is doing a significant amount, much more than it is today, of the work, and maybe professionals will be focused on the actual human interaction. That's obviously like a really different world. It probably sounds crazy to some people, but a few years ago, most experts believed that creative work would be the most challenging area of work for AI, and turns out it was the easiest. So
yeah,
obviously it's hard to think about, given the rapid pace of technological change, it's hard to think about the future. But if you had to guess at what the legal profession will look like in 10 to 15 years, what would it be?
Yeah, it's obviously it's sort of a really hard question, but also one I think about a lot. So I should at least have some sort of an answer for it. And we've been thinking about this quite a bit since sort of the early days of my time at G&T back in 2015. We were trying to sort of forecast where things would look, and I think what's happening, as you described, going back to base fundamentals, the the industry that we've got now, or we've had up until recently, is almost, from an economic point of view, the only unit of production's been labour. It's skilled labour, but it's sort of a labour-driven industry, and that's why, and that's sort of all of the structures of it play out. So we price on the scarcity of labour, i.e. the hourly rate. All of the major firms are largely partnerships, because the labour's so important that labour has to own it, because no other investor would want to own a part of it, because all that will happen is labour will just take the returns off them. And that's what we've seen when some law firms have tried to find a way of listing. They try and sell some of their profit to capital, and then capital won't buy it because they just know labour will take it off them by asking for more. So that's the paradigm that we've had. But we are moving to a labour plus capital model where capital has value. And we're in the early stages of that, but we're starting to see it. And so legal tech companies like yourselves and many others, and this is another thing that you sort of noticed when you came into the industry that I wouldn't have seen from outside, is there are some significant amounts of capital, i.e. venture money and other investments going into technology that will play a role in delivering legal services and will extract some of the return that's currently going to labour. So that shift from a labour-only model to a labour plus capital model has begun. It's in its early days, but I think it will definitely accelerate over the next 10 years, and increasingly a big part of how services are delivered will be via capital in the form of technology, and there will need to be a return on that capital, and that will unlock different ownership models for legal service providers and law firms. It'll have to have different pricing models. To give a little example about it, if you go back a few years, if a sort of thorny problem comes in, like, imagine the concept of a whole bunch of documents from the other side arrive and they need to be reviewed. Going back 5-10 years, the solution was always labour. Let's throw more and better people at the problem. But now, particularly in a field like e-discovery where technology is well developed, it's not that. The first question that's asked and it's not 100,000 documents, now it's 10 million or a million. It's always, what can we do with the technology first? What technology can we run over this to dedupe it, to prepare it, to predict, to give us a first cut? And then we think about how do we apply some people to it. So it's really begun, but I think that sort of what's the technology and the human that we can apply to this legal problem will be asked of every legal problem. It's now happening in certain areas, but I think it will be in the future. So lots of implications. The sort of people who work in the company, in the firm, might look different. I use the word company there. There may be more companies doing this. There will be different specialties that are highly valued as part of the client service delivery. The people that we're hiring at the moment, like data scientists and specialists in AI technology, are now part of our firm. We'll see more of those, and they'll have an important part to play in the firm's future. And then that question of pricing will come. Like at the moment, we do still the bulk of our revenue would come in on an hourly rate basis. Some of that's there's some fixed fee, and some of that hourly rate is under a sort of an estimate that acts as a cap, but generally speaking, that's still the way we price our services, because that's the scarcity of resources. But that will have to change. I mean, it's interesting, at times we'll have a bill that'll go out to clients, and there'll be a certain amount that's there for document review and for lawyers doing this work, and then there'll be a small amount for the processing of that data or the storage of that data, or for the experts that work on it. And it's funny that line can sometimes be challenged by clients. Yet the the labour line is not necessarily the one getting challenged, but actually without the technology line, you might have a whole lot more labour. And so we have to get better at making the case for the value of technology, and we have to help our clients understand why technology is part of the delivery. And so it's up to us as the providers to put a value on our service that includes labour and tech. The sort of open book, here's what the labour was and here's what the tech was, doesn't necessarily work in this new model. So there's some big changes that'll have to take place as this evolution unfolds.
Wow.
So a lot to unpack there, sorry.
No, you've kind of blown up my brain a little bit, but I totally agree. I think that's a really interesting way of putting the trends that we're seeing in kind of an economics lens, actually. Returns to capital versus labor. And it's, of course, we've already seen that in technology and software. And one of the dynamics that plays out in software that doesn't play out as much in other industries due to this like return to capital, this dynamic of the companies involved is it's an incredibly unbalanced area of the world when most of the returns of a piece of work go to the few people that invest in it and make these wonderfully rich tech founders. And I suspect that as more of professional services, as you mentioned, goes down this route, we might see some of the similar dynamics start to play out. Today, the legal sector, most law firms are really small businesses. Like almost all of them are small businesses. Half of all lawyers work in small businesses, small law firms. What's going to happen to the people that aren't thinking about this and who aren't changing their businesses and thinking about what can I do to participate in this change instead of getting disrupted by it?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and I guess it's a societal question overall about what the impact of technology and particularly AI type technology will have, and then sort of within a sector in law, I think it's a challenge. I mean, one of the things we think about, I guess, as a larger law firm where we're trying to embrace this is there's a lot of incredible technology tools out there that have been provided by vendors, by tech companies, and we think that obviously we need to make sure we are a really good customer and user of those, so that the best stuff that's off the shelf, that might be a Microsoft Copilot product that's embedded in their products. That's going to be widely available, so it won't be a competitive advantage that you've got it, but you'll need to make it a competitive advantage that your people use it better than everyone else's people. Same with other more kind of vertical specific legal tech tools. But there is an aspect that sort of is a worry for us, is if all we are is a customer, that could see a huge amount of the value aggregate towards the provider of those tools, and that we're merely sort of the customer of them. And so a part of it is, do we also need to be able to have some distinctive aspects that where the capital is owned by us as well?
Yeah. Because what is the differentiation? It's the commoditization of legal services or traditional legal services. So how do you actually prevent yourself from becoming a commodity? How do you retain the margins instead of them, being competed to zero?
That's right. And so obviously one aspect is you want to be the best to the extent that labor is required to turn the technology into an output. And I think it's for quite some time it still will be. I mean, there may be aspects of the legal industry where the input of labor will be quite minimal. And you can imagine there might be a future where someone could get some quite basic advice entirely from an AI tool via the internet by just paying a subscription fee or a one-off fee. So you've almost got very little labour involved at all. But I think for the higher end, there'll still be a significant portion where labour will, skilled people will need to interpret what the technology is doing and manage that back, and the output will be the product of both. And so you want to have the best skilled people doing the best work there and getting the best return for themselves, but hopefully not paying away a lot of that return to the tech provider.
Yeah, I should clarify. This is kind of the future that we are trying to build.
Yes, I can see. Yeah,
and
that's right. And you're one of those tech providers, and you should do. The tech providers should do the absolute best to deliver the best possible product they can, and they should be rewarded for that. And there's no scale. I mean, we don't want every law firm going and developing each piece of tech because that will be inefficient. But so the first thing we have to do is make sure, to the extent that skilled people coming together and packaging it up is value creating for the client, we need to be the best at that. Yeah. I still think we ought to as law firms, we ought to think about not just being a customer to the tech, but how do we do something a bit more with it? Whether that's a bit of customization on top and a bit of configuration, or whether it's having our own version of certain tasks that are very bespoke to our firm where we're distinctive. But having a bit of a stake in the capital as well as the labour component, I think will be important for long-term sustainability.
There's a lot of things that are going to stand in the way of that future. Of course, regulation is a big one, right? I couldn't today use software to provide legal advice. So in most jurisdictions, it'd be against the law. There's a lot of similar challenges like that, for instance, with self-driving cars. Where today you need a license to drive a vehicle in most jurisdictions, and a piece of software generally won't be able to go through that process. We talked. There are a few questions I'd love to ask, kind of continuing on this storyline. One is you touched on. We're talking about innovation. You touched on investing in innovation. Legal Vision has been one of the fastest growing law firms in Australasia, well known for being massively innovative, incorporating some of these areas of other industries like software to change the way legal services are completed and delivered. You're on the board. How did that relationship start, just quickly?
So it started pretty early in my time at G&T when we were looking at what was going on in the industry and looking at disruption and the way it was working, and that we expected a bit in the sort of Clayton Christensen creative destruction approach to disruption, that people would start doing the basics and do them differently, and then would move up the stack. And a couple of our partners had gone to university with the founder of Legal Vision, Lachlan McKnight, and had introduced us. And it was very interesting the way they were doing it. They were looking to apply kind of the principles of a tech startup to the way in which you deliver legal services, and to productize those services, deliver them to clients in a fixed fee way, in a very efficient manner, but also got very professional on the front end of what they do. So one of the things that Legal Vision prides itself on doing the legal work very well, again, going back to that old G&T kind of philosophy, at a prompt and less expensive way than the large firms. So getting that right, but actually they're also very distinctive on acquiring the customers versus kind of law firms that might be operating in their market that are subscale or don't have the sophistication around online marketing and client care and conversion, etc. So they're very good at bringing clients in, and they're very good at servicing them. And we were just impressed by that. We thought that this is a business that could potentially kind of eventually at some point in growth, it could be disruptive at a part of the market for us, or particularly disruptive at the mid-tier law firms that sit kind of below where we sit. We thought that would be a good thing to have happen. So we decided to invest. We kind of went through that make or buy thing, thinking, oh well, should we have a separate brand that goes at this slightly different market and does it in a different way? And then just realised that the work that Legal Vision had done and the progress they'd been through, but also the fact that it was a startup with a founder mentality. It had, the founder fully engaged their kind of life savings and they're all in on the business, and we should back that. So we've got a minority stake in Legal Vision. We very proud of what they've achieved. It's been a few pivots along the way. It's now very much a subscription business. So it gives, a fixed subscription, giving people access to legal services. So I think it's good to see the disruption. We thought at a point in time that there'd be more opportunities for us to work together on enterprise type clients, where say G&T might do one part of the work and Legal Vision would do a sort of more of the routine and high volume aspects of it. We haven't done as much of that. I think from Legal Vision's point of view, it's a much more investable and interesting proposition to build up their subscriber base rather than periodic episodic events with enterprise clients. So that SME base has been a really strong aspect for them, and so that's been where their focus has been.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There are probably a lot of lessons from Legal Vision around where maybe because of the productization, because of the approach that they've taken, for maybe where is AI going to have the largest effect in terms of the actual kinds of legal work that it might jump into and help out with. And we talked before about the high level trends, that might happen, I suppose, over the 10 years, 15 years and so on. But what do you see as the few near future tasks that AI is going to affect from an operational perspective in law firms like Gilbert and Tobin?
Yeah, so the way in which we do sort of data extraction from things, I think there's a huge element of that could be changed by AI. So kind of going through large databases of documents and the like and extracting key terms and all of that, I think AI is very well suited for that. I think some aspects of legal research, obviously, and we're also looking at how it can do things related to document automation, where the automation kind of approaches at the moment are very if this then that kind of very deductive they take a lot of coding of very sort of deep structures that I think AI can cut through and speed all of that up. So they're kind of immediate areas. And then I think I think sort of speeding up the way in which we can do bringing people up to speed, summarization of documents, all of that they're sort of areas we're looking at quite a bit.
Yeah.
We ran an AI bounty competition amongst our people a few months ago, where we sort of said, like, use some of the AI tools, don't put client data in there, but try them out, see what you think, and come up with some ideas. And our lawyers came up with some terrific ideas around that, and they range from, it wasn't just our lawyers, it was all of our people, because there was a lot of really good ideas in marketing as well. So I think given there's still, like you said, there are some challenges, and we need to get some things sorted out about the extent to which actual sort of confidential client data can be used in these things. We may start to see what will happen is it'll happen around the edge of it in the business of law aspects, where we're using more public or firm data rather than client data, is where I think some of the first types of things that we'll see are. But ultimately, I think it'll be very helpful in drafting of documents, being able to prompt clauses into a precedent and that type of activity. That'll take a little bit longer to get right, but I think that's going to be another near-term opportunity.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Sam. This has been a really interesting conversation. I do have a few quick fire questions to ask.
No worries.
I'd love it if you just, give me the first thing that comes to mind as I jump through these.
Okay, let's go.
What do others not know that you know to be true?
That all of us are just trying to get through.
What do people not understand about law that you wish they did?
Maybe it's something I don't understand. I guess that it's not like what it's like on TV shows. It's not Suits.
What single element would you want to change about the legal industry today?
I think we might have got there, but clearly having uniform laws across the whole country would make sense for the way in which legal profession works.
Final one from me. What's the most painful lesson you've learned that you're pleased to have learned?
There's no one else kind of telling you to do things. You make your own choices.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much. That was great. That was so cool.
Thanks, Luke. That was good fun.